Part 1. Introduction. Understanding Anger and Hatred through Stoicism. Highlights anger and hatred as strong emotions that can and should be controlled. Stoicism asserts that only our perception matters, not the external circumstances themselves. For the Stoics, emotions are the result of our inner beliefs and judgments about the world. Anger and hatred arise from our desire to control situations or people that we cannot control. The Stoics taught that emotions can be tamed through the realization that only the inner world depends on us, while the outside world is always changeable and unpredictable. The Stoics believed that external circumstances, such as the actions of other people or random events, cannot cause us suffering if we do not allow ourselves to react to them internally. In this context, anger and hatred are not so much reactions to external events as a consequence of our perception of these events as threats. For the Stoics, anger was not just eating. Part 2. Anger is a short-term reaction to control violations. Highlights. Anger is an instant reaction to a violation of our control. The Stoics taught that if we lose control, we become slaves to our emotions. When we get angry, we don't react to the fact, but to our judgments about the fact. For example, if someone insults us, anger is not the fact of the insult, but our interpretation that we have been treated unfairly. Stoics argue that such anger is an impulsive feeling that destroys our inner world and does not solve problems, but rather exacerbates them. It's important to learn how to pause before reacting. This allows you to realize that the reaction to anger is a choice, not an inevitability. Anger also prevents us from accepting the situation, making us susceptible to external stimuli and weakening our inner strength. When we talk about anger, it's worth remembering how the Stoics viewed the idea of inner freedom. They taught that only when we stay calm do we stay in control. Part 3. Hate is the destruction of connection with people and oneself. Highlights. Hate is a chronic condition that destroys relationships and exacerbates the perception of the world. Hatred arises when we begin to perceive people as enemies, which prevents us from seeing them as people with their own problems and weaknesses. The Stoics teach that everyone acts according to what they think is right, and no one is obligated to meet our expectations. Attachments, especially negative ones like hatred, only strengthen our dependence on external factors. The more we hate, the more we become addicted to what is happening around us. Stoics teach forgiveness, but not in order to justify the bad deeds of others, but to free themselves from destructive emotions and regain their inner freedom. Many philosophers, including the Stoics, have argued that hatred is a destructive emotion that spoils our inner world. Instead of allowing ourselves to get stuck in negative feelings, Stoics urge us to look at the situation objectively and understand that other people's actions are a reflection of their internal processes and not something that should harm us. Quotes Epictetus wrote, "Those who hate cannot find peace, as their energy is spent fighting those who have disappointed them." Seneca said that hatred is a long and heavy burden that we carry on ourselves. Practical task. Remember a situation when you felt hatred for a person. try to understand what exactly led to this feeling in his actions. Maybe it's not a personal grudge behind this, but an unfair expectation. Part 4. The Wisdom of Stoicism. Liberation from Anger and Hatred. Highlights. Liberation from anger and hatred begins with an inner realization: I am in control of my reactions, not external circumstances. The Stoics taught us to consider emotions as the result of judgments. Therefore, they called for a rethink of the situation, which avoids unnecessary reactions. Stoicism offers a number of practices for managing emotions, such as thinking before going to bed about how we went through the day and what we could change in our attitude towards people and events. An important element of Stoicism is self-improvement through daily meditation, self-control, and the realization that it is we who create our feelings. Stoics emphasize that you can be calm despite what is happening around you. When Stoics talk about self-control, they don't mean suppressing emotions, but taking an active role in managing them. It is a conscious choice not to give in to impulses, but to act wisely. Quotes, Epictetus, "If you want to be free, then learn not to give in to passions and desires." Seneca, "Wisdom is the ability to calmly analyze a situation and accept what is beyond your control." Practical assignment. Every evening, before going to bed, take a minute to analyze your day. What made you angry or annoyed? How could you react to this situation differently? Part 5. A life without anger and hatred. The path to inner peace. Highlights. Living without anger and hatred allows us to feel inner freedom, reduce stress, and find joy in simple things. The wisdom of Stoicism lies in the ability to calmly perceive any events because they cannot disturb our inner peace. The Stoics taught that a person who is freed from passions and negative emotions becomes clearer and more determined. Happiness for a Stoic is not a state that depends on external circumstances, but the result of a reasonable, conscious attitude to life. When we live without anger and hatred, we not only free ourselves from destructive emotions, but also get the opportunity to see the world as it is. This process takes time and effort, but it's worth it to learn how to live at peace with yourself and others. Quotes, Marcus Aurelius, "You can be happy only when you stop letting emotions control your life." Seneca, "Those who strive for inner peace find it in themselves, not in the outside world." Practical assignment. During the next week, try to pass a day without the emotions of anger and hatred. Every time you feel them starting to take over your mind, stop and try to see the situation from a different perspective. What can you change in your perception?